So Kamala Harris spoke to Charlamagne. He has, I guess, a Comedy Central show. That guy does like 47 shows. I don't know how he has the time, although I shouldn't talk because I do quite a few shows myself. Anyway, so he started off the interview. Look, I'm going to show you a little clip here, but he started off the interview in kind of a sycophantic way. Easy questions, softballs down the center of the plate. Basically was like, hey, do you think you're treated terribly because you're a black woman? And he insinuates like, of course, that's why you're treated badly. But then after he does, the fluff job at the beginning, then he pours it on heavy. And not only does he ask real questions, he won't let her off the hook. I think he asked Kamala Harris about Joe Manchin 3 or 4 times in the interview, and she gave terrible answers. So let me show you some of that here, and then we'll react.
Somebody has to push back on Joe Manchin. That guy is stopping progress. He's ruining democracy. Are you willing to be that superhero? Because what scares me is if voting rights don't pass, or the Build Back Better plan doesn't pass, or police reform doesn't pass, I doubt you're going to get black people to go out there and vote in 2022 and 2024, and, Trump will be president again. What's the plan for all of that?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on the seriousness of these issues and how people take these issues seriously.
Who's the superhero that's going to speak against Joe Manchin? No. I want to know who's the real president of this country. Is it Joe Biden or Joe Manchin?
I'm sorry. I interrupted. I think the vice president can hear you. It's Simone. I'm so sorry, Charlamagne. We have to wrap.
She can hear me.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me, Madam Vice President?
So I'm sorry. You got to wrap.
Oh.
So I'm sorry to interrupt.
They're acting like they can't hear me.
I can hear you.
So who's the real president of this country? Is it Joe Manchin or Joe Biden, Madam Vice President?
Come on, Charlamagne.
It's
Joe Biden.
I can't tell sometimes.
No. It's Joe Biden. And don't start talking like a Republican about asking whether or not he's president.
Do you think Joe Manchin is a problem?
It's Joe Biden, and I'm vice president, and my name is Kamala Harris.
So she goes on there to say something to the effect of, like, here are the issues we care about, and this is why this matters. And she lists, like, a bunch of issues. And the response to that is, if you actually care about the things that you just said you care about, then you have to directly call out Joe Biden. You have to declare who the obstructionist is and what he's getting in the way of. So Charlamagne lists it there. He's like, look, voting rights, Build Back Better. If you don't pass these things, black people aren't going to vote for you in 2022 and maybe even in 2024. So in a weird way, Charlamagne is actually trying to help not only Kamala Harris, but Democrats. And he's saying, look, my finger's on the pulse out here in the real world. And the fact of the matter is, you guys aren't doing Dickie McGee's acts. And since you're not doing Dickie McGee's acts, I can read a poll, and the polls show that you guys are in trouble. You're in deep, deep trouble. There was that poll that had Joe Biden at 38% approval rating. Kamala Harris is at 28% approval rating. Mayor Pete is at 37% approval rating. The Democrats in some polls are down 10 points in the generic ballot for Congress to the Republicans. Even in the good polls, they're like tied, and that's not going to be enough because the fact of the matter is Democrats need to win by like 5 points just to keep the numbers that they currently have because of all the gerrymandering. So Charlamagne is trying to wake up Kamala Harris here and say, if you don't call out the enemy and you don't put pressure and you don't actually fight for these things, why do you think you're going to win? Why do you think you do well? And the thing that really got under her skin is it President Biden or President Manchin? Who's president right now? The answer to that is functionally Joe Manchin. Now, this came out right before we got the news that Joe Manchin was like, yeah, I'm going to vote no on Build Back Better. So in other words, the point was proved within the next 2 or 3 days that, no, of course, the president is Joe Manchin. It's not Joe Biden. And what's Joe Biden's approach been to dealing with Joe Manchin? Slap him on the back, call him JoJo. He has a nickname for him where he calls him JoJo. They've been shredding their own bill 14 ways to Sunday in order to appease Joe Manchin to get him on. And then even after shredding it 14 ways to Sunday, Joe Manchin turns around and goes, no, I can't do it. I can't get on board. So let's understand what that means. That means literally, no matter how much stuff you take out of the bill, no matter how much you weaken it, no matter how small you make the price tag, Joe Manchin turns around and says, nope, I'm still not for it. Now, how do we get to this point? Look, my theory is the reason why we got to this point is ultimately Pelosi, Schumer, and Biden, they would prefer a bill that's like $1 trillion or something, a smaller Build Back Better Act. And so they're probably sitting there thinking, I like it that Manchin is stripping out all these provisions and making it weaker and weaker and weaker because that more coincides with their version of politics. What they didn't bank on was Joe Manchin ultimately saying, when push comes to shove, I'm not for anything at all. But Kamala Harris here is really showing the complete and utter lack of a strategy and a lack of caring about the substance of the bill, even though she pretends and goes on to virtue signal like, these are the issues we care about. I love how Simone Sanders, who was Kamala Harris's top aide, jumped in there to try to save Kamala. So in other words, Simone Sanders heard a question that was a real question about who's president, Joe Biden or Joe Manchin, and she flipped out and she tried to interject and intervene and shut the whole thing down. Understand something. Mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, and others, nightly news, they would never ask a question like that. And that is an indictment on the mainstream media outlets because this is a real line of questioning. And the fact of the matter is either Charlamagne feels comfortable enough with Kamala Harris that, hey, I'm going to ask this, or he doesn't care about the access, and so he doesn't care if she doesn't come back on the show again, and so he's going to ask this. But either way, he's doing the job that a real reporter and a real journalist should do. And by the way, if she doesn't ever go back on his show again, well, then now you know why CNN and MSNBC and others don't push Democrats like that, because they want the access. They want to know when Kamala Harris tries to run in 2024 or 2028 or whatever, the reporters at CNN and MSNBC, reporters, want to be the one that gets the exclusive that Kamala Harris calls. Credit to Charlamagne, man. Credit to Charlamagne for asking real questions. And you saw how angry she got there. You saw how angry Kamala Harris got. If it was that Kamala Harris who was angry, and she was angry fighting for the specific policies of Build Back Better, like child care, elder care, lowering prescription drug prices, Medicare expansion, so on and so forth, then we'd all like her and support her. But she never has the anger for that. She has the anger for people who are pointing out the charade and the facade and the kabuki theater of what goes on behind the scenes. So ultimately, all she cares about is her own political ambitions. And within the Democratic Party, they have an ethos of you don't go after conservative Democrats and right-wing Democrats and corporatist Democrats. And it's so clear here. Compare this with Republicans. If there was a Republican who wouldn't hop on board with Trump's tax cuts, which, by the way, I think they all did, but if there was any that wouldn't, they'd make that person public enemy number one. And they'd go after them ruthlessly and viciously and ultimately make that person fall in line. The Democrats are institutionally weak because they're also serving the same corporate donors. And so you're not supposed to go after the right-wing Democrats. All you do is chastise and berate and go after the left-wing Democrats to try to make them more right-wing and make them more corporate. And this is such a great example of it here. Joe Manchin has repeatedly spit in the eye of Democratic leadership, and their response every single time is, may I have another, please? She'd rather get mad at Charlamagne for a real question than get mad at Joe Manchin for effectively tanking the Democratic agenda. So listen, it's going to be a total blowout in 2022 and possibly in 2024. And they have nobody to blame but themselves. And even Democratic-aligned media. Like Charlamagne's politics, I'm sure, are not my politics. I'm sure he's much more standard partisan Democrat. But even he sees the writing on the wall, and he's giving them a heads up. And the response is to kill the messenger, as opposed to take it to heart and adjust course moving forward. So, can't say they weren't warned. And by the way, this is an opinion that I'm sure nobody ever expresses to them, so they're actually maybe somewhat shocked by it. That this is what you think, and this is what you fear will happen. And wow, I didn't see that coming. Well, it's because you guys all have DC brain rot, and you're corrupted. And so things that seem obvious to everybody else seem insane to you. Because the narrative you're used to hearing is it's always the left's fault, it's always the left's fault, it's always the left's fault. And then now you're getting a dose of reality that in the real world, Americans and the Democratic base are blaming Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And instead of going after them, naming the enemy, maybe even prosecuting them for their various crimes, you protect them. Well, chickens are coming home to roost. You made your bed and now you're going to sleep in it. Insert other platitude about what goes around comes around, because it's happening, man. It's happening. So, massive credit again to Charlamagne asking real questions, and you see how angry she got, and you see how defensive she got, and you see how she had no real answer. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.